The chains were never meant for royalty. They were meant for monsters. And yet Princess Verith hung between two obsidian pillars above the burning caldera of Kael'thar, her wings bound in rune-etched iron, her chest restrained by bands that glowed with suppression sigils. She will never bear fire. The words echoed across the volcanic amphitheater like a sentence of death. Below, thousands of dragons watched in silence. No one roared. No one protested. Because they had already seen it. 3 trials. 3 attempts. 3 failures. Verith opened her jaws one last time. Her throat convulsed. Her chest tightened. She forced everything she had forward. And only a thin ribbon of grey smoke drifted into the sky. No flame. No ignition. No future. A low murmur spread through the gathered elders. Among dragons, fire was more than a weapon. It was life. It was bloodline. It was inheritance. A dragon who could not generate flame could not pass it on. Infertile. The word was never spoken loudly. But it carried more shame than exile. High Flame Priest Arcana stepped forward, his scales black as cooled magma, his horns adorned with gold bands of lineage. The Ember line ends with her, he declared. Verith lowered her head. Her once brilliant crimson scales had dulled over weeks of restraint. The suppression runes embedded in the chains pulsed faintly, dampening the fire core within her chest. She could feel it. The ember inside her. Small. Weak. Unstable. But not gone. I can burn, she rasped. The crowd shifted. You have tried, Arcana replied coldly. And you have failed. She strained against the chains. The iron cut into her scales. I am not broken. Silence answered her. Then the priest spoke the words that froze the wind itself. She will be removed at dusk. Not executed. Dragons did not use such crude terms. But everyone understood. Removed meant erased from succession. Removed meant hidden. Removed meant forgotten. The chains tightened slightly, reacting to her rising pulse. Verith closed her eyes. The caldera below churned with molten rivers. Heat shimmered against her scales, but no answering heat rose from within her. Across the terraces, young hatchlings watched with wide, fearful eyes. This is what happens if you fail. Hours passed. The sun shifted, casting red light across the volcanic city carved into the mountain's face. Steam vents hissed. Warships drifted overhead in controlled patrol arcs. And far below, at docking platform 12, a human ship descended through the thermal haze. It was compact. Industrial. Scarred by micrometeor impacts. Its hull bore a simple marking. Hail interstellar maintenance and recovery. The landing struts hit stone with a hydraulic hiss. The hatch opened. Out stepped a man in oil-stained coveralls, sleeves rolled up, a diagnostic tablet clipped to his belt and a scanning rig slung over one shoulder. His name was Gavin Hale. And he was already annoyed. The Dragon Empire's orbital defense lattice had experienced structural instability in its gravity alignment nodes. Their engineers, brilliant with plasma weaponry, had proven shockingly incompetent with fine calibration circuitry. Gavin had been contracted because dragons preferred fire to finesse. A massive quartermaster awaited him. You are smaller than expected, the dragon rumbled. Most geniuses are, Gavin replied dryly. The dragon narrowed his eyes but turned to lead him through magma-carved corridors reinforced with alloy bracing. The interior was magnificent. And inefficient. Your plasma containment routing is cross-fed through ornamental housing, Gavin muttered, scanning a passing conduit. That's going to overload. The quartermaster snorted smoke. Dragons do not hide their power. Yeah, Gavin said. You also don't label your wiring. They passed deeper into the volcanic complex. Then Gavin heard it. Not machinery. Not structural stress. A sound. Strained. Raw. Almost, wounded. He slowed. The quartermaster kept walking. Gavin stopped entirely. That's not a failing gravity stabilizer, he said. The quartermaster stiffened. You are here for the defense lattice. That sound isn't metal. Another exhale echoed faintly through the stone. Weak. Controlled. Like something trying not to cry out. Gavin turned toward the open-air terraces. The quartermaster's wings flared. You will not go there. Why? Silence. It is a royal matter. Gavin tilted his head. He had worked long enough in salvage zones and war-torn systems to recognize that tone. Something was being covered. Royal things break too, he said calmly. 2 dragon guards stepped into his path. Gavin raised both hands. I fix broken things. That's my only setting. The guards hesitated. Humans had a reputation. They were fragile, but persistent, and strangely fearless around larger species. The sound came again. Gavin moved past the guards before they fully decided. He stepped onto the volcanic terrace and stopped cold. Suspended between two obsidian pillars was a young dragon, her wings bound, her chest restrained, runelit chains suppressing something deep inside her. Her scales were crimson beneath layers of ash and restraint marks. Her eyes opened slowly, gold, furious, and filled with something worse than anger. Shame. Gavin swallowed. What did she do? A cold voice answered from behind him. She failed. High Flame Priest Arcana emerged from the shadows. Gavin gestured upward. Failed what? She cannot produce flame, the priest said. Therefore she cannot produce heirs. Gavin blinked. That's it. A low growl rippled through the watching dragons. That is not it, human, the priest said sharply. Fire is life. Gavin looked back at the princess. Smoke drifted faintly from her nostrils. He frowned. That wasn't absence. That was suppression. His mechanic instincts triggered. He stepped closer. The guards tensed. You will not touch her, the priest warned. I'm not touching, Gavin said, unclipping his handheld scanner. I'm looking. The device hummed to life. It scanned the rune frequencies first. Then the iron composition. Then the energy flux around her chest cavity. It beeped. Once. Twice. 3 times. Gavin's brow furrowed. That's interesting. The priest's claws dug into the stone floor. You presume to understand draconic biology? No, Gavin said honestly. He lifted the scanner again, adjusting settings. But I understand containment systems. He pointed at the glowing runes embedded in the iron. You're not testing her fire core. He looked up at the priest. You're suppressing it. The terrace went still. Verith's eyes widened. Gavin stepped even closer now, studying the sigils. These aren't diagnostic bindings, he continued. They are stabilization locks. You're dampening a surge. The priest's voice hardened. She has no surge. Gavin met his gaze. She does. He tapped the scanner. You didn't test her wrong. A faint flicker pulsed beneath Verith's scales. Small. Unstable. But real. Gavin looked back at the chains. You bound her wrong. And for the first time since her sentencing, the ember inside Princess Verith sparked. Very faint. But undeniable. To be continued. The terrace did not breathe. Dragons did not fidget. They did not whisper. They did not doubt publicly. But now? They stared at the human. You will choose your next words carefully, High Flame Priest Arcana said, his voice like grinding stone. Gavin didn't look away. He crouched slightly, angling the scanner again toward the runes binding Princess Verith's chest. I already did, he replied calmly. The device projected a faint holographic lattice over her torso, a web of energy pathways that pulsed dimly beneath her scales. Most of the pathways were steady. One was not. There, Gavin said, pointing to a fluctuating node deep in her sternum. Your readings probably showed instability, right? Energy spikes. Irregular ignition patterns. The priest said nothing. But that silence confirmed everything. You assumed a malformed fire core, Gavin continued. Genetic failure. Non-viable reproductive flame. A low murmur rippled through the watching dragons. That was exactly the diagnosis. Verith's claws curled weakly against her restraints. They called it decay, she said quietly. Gavin looked up at her. It's not decay. He stood. It's overload. That word hit harder than any accusation. The priest's wings flexed slightly. Impossible. Her ignition attempts produced no flame. Because you suppressed the surge before it stabilized, Gavin shot back. These bindings aren't neutral restraints. They are dampeners tuned to flatten high-output spikes. He gestured to the glowing sigils. You see failure. I see a system tripping a breaker. The priest's eyes narrowed. Explain, human. Gavin stepped closer to the pillar, examining the rune frequency more carefully. You dragons evolved around volcanic ecosystems, right? Stable thermal gradients. Predictable magma pressure. Your fire cores develop gradually. He glanced at Verith. But hers didn't. The hologram pulsed brighter for a split second. She's not underproducing flame. She's overproducing raw ignition energy. It's chaotic because it's compressed. He tapped the scanner again. This is what happens when a containment organ evolves stronger than its output channels. Silence. Confusion. Then a sharp inhale from one of the elder dragons. That is, not possible. Gavin shrugged. Yeah. That's what people usually say right before something changes their whole system. Verith felt it again. That ember. It flickered stronger now, responding to the removal of doubt more than the removal of chains. You are saying, the priest said slowly, that she is not barren. I'm saying, Gavin replied, that if you let her ignite without suppression, this terrace might not exist anymore. That did it. The crowd erupted into shocked roars. Guards stepped forward. The priest raised one claw, and silence snapped back into place. You claim, Arcana said carefully, that she possesses excessive fire. Not controlled fire, Gavin corrected. Untuned fire. He looked up at Verith. Has it ever hurt? Her jaw tightened. When I try to force ignition, it feels like my chest is splitting. Gavin nodded once. Pressure build up. You don't lack flame. You lack venting. The priest stepped forward, towering over him. You speak boldly for one so fragile. Gavin met his gaze evenly. I fix fusion cores for a living. Fragile doesn't survive that. The priest studied him. You would remove the suppression? Yes. You would risk destabilization of a royal heir? She's already destabilizing, Gavin said bluntly. Your chains are masking it. Not fixing it. The wind shifted across the caldera. Ash swirled. Verith's heart pounded harder now. Hope was dangerous. Hope hurt more than shame. If you are wrong, the priest said quietly, she dies. Gavin didn't hesitate. If I'm wrong, she was already dying. That landed hard. The priest turned his gaze upward at Verith. For the first time since her failure, he truly looked at her. Not as a symbol. Not as a disappointment. But as a patient. Remove the lower dampeners, he ordered. Gasps echoed. The guards hesitated. Now. The runes along her lower chest flickered and dimmed as two of the chains retracted slightly. Instantly. Verith screamed. Not in weakness. In sensation. Heat surged violently through her core. The hologram flared bright red. Energy spiked. Several dragons recoiled. She is destabilizing, one elder shouted. Hold, Gavin barked sharply. He adjusted the scanner settings, projecting a new pattern, a waveform stabilizer frequency tuned against the rune harmonics. Her channels are misaligned, he muttered. She's compressing output into a single vent. He looked up. Verith. Don't force it. Don't push. Let it rise. Her vision blurred. The pressure inside her chest was immense, but different now. Not suffocating. Expanding. Breathe, Gavin said firmly. Drag it up your spine. Not forward. Dragons did not take breathing advice from humans. But she did. Slow inhale. Slow focus. The ember surged. This time, it did not choke. It climbed. Up her throat. Across her palate. The watching dragons held their breath. A spark appeared between her teeth. Tiny. Blue-white. Not red. Not orange. Blue. The priest's eyes widened. That color. The spark grew. Then snapped into a controlled, concentrated stream of flame no wider than a spear. It shot forward across the terrace. And carved a clean molten line through solid obsidian 20 meters away. Silence. Absolute silence. Verith hung there, panting. Smoke did not drift from her jaws. Heat radiated steadily now. Controlled. Alive. Gavin lowered the scanner slowly. Told you, he said quietly. The priest stared at the glowing molten trench. Blue flame. Royal flame. Ancient texts whispered of it, a rarer ignition state linked to high-output lineage cores. Not infertility. Not weakness. Potential. He looked back at the human. What did you do? Gavin clipped the scanner back to his belt. I stopped you from strangling your own engine. Above them, Verith felt the chains differently now. Not suppressing. Holding back something that wanted to grow. And for the first time, she smiled. But the priest's gaze darkened slightly. Unstable systems, he said softly, are still dangerous. Gavin followed his gaze upward. He understood immediately. This wasn't over. Because if she truly possessed an overcharged core, then someone had misdiagnosed her. On purpose. And dragon politics burned hotter than any flame. The molten trench across the terrace still glowed. Blue. Not red. Not gold. Blue flame was not myth. It was pre-imperial. Ancient. The kind of fire that forged dynasties, or ended them. No dragon spoke. They were too busy recalculating everything they believed. Princess Verith hung between the pillars, breathing steadily now. Heat radiated from her scales and controlled waves. The dullness was gone. Her crimson shimmered again. High Flame Priest Arcana stepped closer to the molten scar carved into obsidian. He extended one claw and hovered it near the heat. Not touching. Measuring. Blue flame burned hotter, denser, more refined. It was not brute destruction. It was compression. Precision. He turned slowly toward the elders. This is not infertility. His voice carried across the caldera. This is lineage variance. A dangerous phrase. Across the terrace, several elder dragons stiffened. One of them stepped forward, Lord Malva, keeper of succession law. Or mutation, Malva countered smoothly. Gavin folded his arms. There it is. Politics. She is unstable, Malva continued. If her core overcharges during a mating cycle, she could incinerate a clutch. Murmurs spread. Verith's jaw tightened. That wasn't what the diagnostic said, Gavin cut in. Malva's golden eyes snapped to him. You presume to interrupt succession debate, human? Yeah, Gavin replied flatly. Because someone rigged your diagnostics. The terrace went still again. Arcana's head turned slowly. Clarify. Gavin walked to the nearest chain pillar and ran his hand along the rune housing. These dampeners aren't standard suppression. They're tuned too aggressively. Look at the harmonic bias. He activated the scanner again and projected the waveform. The priest stepped closer. Even Malva leaned in despite himself. These sigils are calibrated to trigger suppression at 70% ignition threshold, Gavin explained. Normal safety locks engage at 90. Arcana's eyes narrowed. 70% would prevent. Full expression, Gavin finished. She never had a chance to stabilize. Verith felt something colder than shame. Anger. She had failed 3 trials. 3 public humiliations. 3 times her flame had collapsed. Not collapsed. Choked. Malva's voice hardened. You imply sabotage. I imply incompetence or intent, Gavin said calmly. You choose which. Low growls rolled through the elders. Arcana's wings unfurled slightly. Who authorized her restraints? Silence. Malva answered. The Succession Council approved the calibration. Based on whose analysis? Arcana pressed. Another pause. Too long. Verith's heart pounded. She remembered. The day of her first trial. Malva had stood closest. Whispered something to the technicians. She had thought it advice. It had been adjustment. You were afraid, Gavin said quietly, eyes on Malva. Not of her failing. He looked up at Verith. You were afraid of her succeeding. The accusation struck like thunder. Blue flame flickered faintly between Verith's teeth. Malva's tail lashed. Human ignorance does not understand dragon balance. A monarch with excessive ignition could destabilize territorial equilibrium. Or dominate it, Gavin replied. There it was. Not fear of explosion. Fear of power shift. Blue flame meant elevated lineage strength. A queen capable of overwhelming rivals. A ruler no council could easily control. Arcana turned to Malva. You will answer. Malva's voice dropped to a dangerous calm. We safeguarded the empire. By crippling its heir. Arcana's tone sharpened. By preventing civil fracture, Malva snapped. You know what blue core inheritance means. It consolidates flame rights. It erases negotiated succession. The crowd stirred uneasily. Gavin understood only half the politics. But he understood power. Someone had decided Verith was too powerful to risk. So they labeled her broken. Verith's voice cut through the tension. You told me I was empty. Every dragon turned upward. She slowly lifted her head. Her eyes no longer carried shame. Only heat. You told me I would never bear fire. A thin ribbon of blue flame danced between her teeth. Controlled. Intentional. Malva held her gaze. You were unstable. I was restrained. That landed. Harder than any flame. Arcana exhaled slowly. If this was manipulation. His gaze swept the elders. It is treason. Several dragons stepped back instinctively. Malva's composure cracked slightly. You would fracture the council over a human's interference. I would fracture it over deceit, Arkana replied. The wind across the caldera intensified. Ash swirled in spirals. Verith felt her core expanding more smoothly now. Without the lower dampeners, energy flowed along channels Gavin had described. Up the spine. Across the throat. Not forced. Directed. She looked down at the human mechanic. You saw it, she said softly. Gavin shrugged. I see pressure systems. Yours was misrouted. A small, disbelieving laugh escaped her. Dragons did not laugh publicly. But she did. Malva stepped forward suddenly. You think this ends because she produced a spark? Blue flame does not guarantee fertility. The word hung again. Fertility. The original accusation. Gavin tilted his head. You're still thinking output equals reproduction. Malva snarled. Explain yourself. Gavin gestured upward. Her core isn't defective. It's overcompressed. If you recalibrate her channeling during bond ignition. He stopped. Several dragons stiffened. Bond ignition. Reproductive flame pairing. You're suggesting a mechanical correction to mating rights. Malva said incredulously. I'm suggesting you stop treating biology like superstition. Arkana studied the human carefully. Can her core sustain clutch formation? Gavin looked at Verith. Not if you keep choking it. Silence again. But this time, it was different. Not doubt. Consideration. Verith felt it too. The shift. Not in flame. In authority. The narrative had cracked. She was not barren. She was restrained. And someone had ensured it. Malva's voice dropped to a near whisper. You do not understand what you are awakening, human. Gavin met his gaze steadily. Yeah, he said. I do. Blue flame flared slightly around Verith's jaws. Controlled. Not explosive. But present. Alive. Arkana turned toward the pillars. Release the remaining dampeners. Gasps rippled. Priest, Malva began. Release them. The upper restraints retracted slightly. Energy surged. But this time, Verith did not scream. She inhaled slowly. Focused. Directed. A steady column of blue flame rose upward into the sky. Not wide. Not destructive. Perfectly vertical. It pierced the cloud layer above the caldera. A signal visible across the capital. The ember line was not dead. It had evolved. And somewhere beyond the terrace, other dragons were already reacting. Because blue flame did not just mean power. It meant claim. And claim meant challenges. Arkana's voice carried quietly to Gavin. You may have saved her life. Gavin watched the flame rise. Yeah, he said. Then he glanced at Malva. But I think I just started a war. The blue pillar of fire did not waver. It rose from Princess Verith's jaws like a banner carved from light itself, piercing the ash-choked sky above Kaeldar. Across the capital terraces, dragons lifted their heads. Blue flame. Not seen in 3 centuries. Not since the War of Cinders. On the main terrace, silence lasted exactly 4 heartbeats. Then the alarms began. Deep bronze gongs reverberated through the volcanic city. Not invasion. Not disaster. Succession challenge. High Flame Priest Arkana's voice cut through the rising tension. Stand down. But the air was already shifting. From the upper tiers of the capital, a massive shape descended in controlled fury. Wings spanning nearly the width of the terrace. Scales dark gold-edged with iron. Scars across his chest from ancient duels. General Kael Dravarin. First claw of the Imperial Guard. Declared second in succession after Verith's failure. He landed hard enough to crack stone. The blue flame flickered as Verith lowered her jaws. Not from fear. From focus. Dravarin's eyes locked onto her. Then to the molten trench carved earlier. Then to Gavin. Smoke curled from his nostrils. You ignite blue flame, Dravarin said slowly. After 3 public failures. His gaze shifted to the priest. You declared her barren. Arkana held firm. The declaration is under review. Dravarin's tail lashed once. Under review. He looked back at Verith. Or manufactured. The word hit harder than any roar. Malva stiffened visibly. Politics had now stepped into military territory. Dravarin turned toward the chained pillars. Release her. Arkana hesitated only a moment. Release all restraints. The final rune locks disengaged with a heavy metallic echo. The chains withdrew fully. For the first time in weeks. Princess Verith stood freely upon the volcanic stone. Her wings unfurled slowly. Massive. Regal. Crimson scales glowing faintly with internal blue light. She stumbled once. Gavin instinctively stepped forward. She caught herself before he reached her. Their eyes met briefly. "I am not fragile," she said quietly. He gave a small nod. "Good." Draverin stepped closer, towering. "You displayed blue core ignition before the capital," he said. "You understand what that means?" Verith met his gaze directly. "It means I was never empty." "It means," Draverin corrected, "you now carry a challenge." The crowd shifted uneasily. Blue core inheritance rewrote succession law. Any dragon of high rank could now issue formal trial. Not assassination. Not rebellion. Trial by flame. Maelva seized the moment. If her core is unstable, the Empire cannot risk her ascendancy without proof. There it was. The trap. Force her into a public trial. If she faltered once, the narrative of instability would return. Draverin studied her carefully. "You accept the challenge?" he asked. The wind swirled ash around them. Verith felt her core steady. Not explosive. Not chaotic. Alive. She looked at Gavin. Not for permission. For grounding. He didn't speak. Just tapped 2 fingers lightly against his own chest. "Breathe. Channel up. Not forward." She inhaled slowly. Then faced Draverin again. "I accept." A roar erupted across the terrace. Not anger. Anticipation. Arkana raised one claw. Trial by flame. Controlled output. Single discharge. No lethal intent. Draverin nodded once. He stepped back 20 paces. Verith moved opposite him. The molten trench between them still glowed faintly. Draverin ignited first. Gold flame burst from his jaws in a wide arc, powerful, steady, traditional royal ignition. The heat rolled across the terrace. He ended cleanly. Controlled. The crowd rumbled approval. Then all eyes shifted to Verith. The old fear whispered in the back of her mind. What if it surges? What if it fractures? She closed her eyes. Not forcing ignition. Not pushing outward. She felt the ember deep in her core. Compressed. Dense. Blue. She directed it upward along the channels Gavin had helped her understand. Up the spine. Across the throat. Not wide. Focused. Her eyes opened. And she exhaled. The blue flame did not roar. It sang. A narrow, intensely bright beam of cobalt fire shot forward, not spreading, not scattering. It struck the center of Draverin's earlier gold mark. And pierced straight through the stone beyond. The obsidian behind the terrace shattered in a clean circular breach. Not cracked. Not splintered. Drilled. Silence fell like a blade. Draverin stared at the hole. Then slowly exhaled smoke. "That," he said quietly, "is not instability." Verith lowered her head. The flame cut off instantly. No sputter. No flare. No collapse. Perfect cessation. Control. The watching dragons did not roar this time. They bowed. Not all. But enough. Maelva stepped back involuntarily. His narrative was gone. Draverin turned toward Arkana. "She holds blue core precision." Arkana nodded. "Confirmed." Draverin looked at Verith. "If you ascend, you consolidate flame rights." "I will not consolidate," she replied calmly. "I will regulate." A murmur of surprise rippled outward. Blue core monarchs historically dominated through sheer ignition superiority. She was offering restraint. Draverin studied her carefully. "You would limit your own advantage." "Yes." Her eyes shifted briefly toward Gavin. "Strength without control fractures empires." That line settled deeply across the terrace. Draverin turned slowly toward Maelva. "Who authorized 70% dampening?" Maelva's composure cracked at last. "It was precaution." "It was suppression," Draverin corrected. 2 members of the Imperial Guard stepped forward. Not violently, but decisively. Maelva realized, too late, that the political tide had shifted. Blue flame had not only restored Verith's legitimacy. It had exposed fear. Arkana's voice rang clear. "Council investigation will convene at dusk." Maelva was escorted away under watch. Not executed. Not yet. Dragons preferred formal reckoning. Draverin turned back to Verith. "The Empire watches." She nodded. "I know." Then he looked at Gavin. "You interfered in dragon succession." Gavin scratched the back of his neck. "I fixed a calibration problem." Dravarin studied him for a long moment. Then, unexpectedly, bowed his head slightly. Then you have altered our future, mechanic. Around them, the capital still buzzed with reaction. Blue flame rising above the terraces had already spread across every district. The ember line was alive. And not fragile. But as the crowd slowly dispersed, Arcana stepped closer to Verith, voice lower now. Blue core inheritance affects more than succession. She held his gaze. I know. It affects clutch formation. The original accusation resurfaced. Fertility. Proof of future heirs. The Empire would demand it. Soon. Verith's jaw tightened. Gavin caught the shift instantly. He understood engines. He understood pressure. He also understood expectations. And he had a sinking feeling. Fixing her ignition was only the first impossibility. Because proving she could bear flame was one thing. Proving she could bear airs would be another. And somewhere deep in the volcanic capital, forces that preferred her labeled Baron were already recalculating. The capital did not sleep that night. Blue flame had split the sky. And with it, centuries of quiet control fractured. By dawn, the investigation had already uncovered what many suspected. Malva had not acted alone. 3 council technicians, 2 succession scholars, 1 senior runesmith. All had recalibrated Verith's suppression bindings under the justification of stability safeguards. 70% ignition dampening. A silent throttle on a future queen. They had not tried to kill her. That would have sparked civil war. They had tried to weaken her. Slowly. Publicly. Irreversibly. But blue flame does not disappear quietly. It waits. And it burns hotter under pressure. Verith stood on the highest terrace at sunrise. Unchained. Unrestrained. The volcanic winds curled around her wings. Below, thousands gathered again. Not to witness failure. To witness decision. High Flame Priest Arcana stepped forward. The council confirms suppression interference. A ripple moved through the crowd. Punishment will be rendered under imperial law. Malva and the others knelt below the dais. Not bound. But stripped of rank. Dravarin stood guard. Arcana turned toward Verith. The ember line is restored. The words echoed. Restored. Not replaced. Not repaired. Restored. Verith stepped forward. Her voice carried without shouting. I was called Baron. Silence fell. I was told I would never bear fire. A faint blue glow shimmered beneath her scales. I do not seek vengeance. That surprised many. She continued. I seek correction. Her gaze shifted to the kneeling conspirators. You feared what you could not regulate. Her wings opened slightly. I will not be a monarch who rules by overwhelming flame. Murmurs of approval spread. I will regulate output rights across all houses. No more suppression through politics. No more concealed calibrations. Dravarin nodded once. That was strength. Not domination. Control. The crowd bowed again. Not forced. Earned. But one question remained. Not political. Biological. Fertility. Without heirs, succession would reopen instability within a generation. Whispers had already begun. Blue flame meant power. But could she sustain clutch ignition? Arcana approached carefully once the formal proceedings ended. The Empire will ask, he said quietly. Verith nodded. I know. Gavin stood nearby, arms folded, watching dragons behave like any other political species in the galaxy. Same patterns. Different scales. You're worried about ignition bonding, he said casually. Several dragons blinked at him. Dravarin looked intrigued. You continue to speak boldly, the general observed. Gavin shrugged. I fix systems. That includes reproductive energy loops. Verith looked at him sharply. You understand that? Enough, he said. Your core isn't defective. It's high density. That means bond ignition will require channel stabilization on both sides. Dravarin tilted his head. You imply partner compatibility constraints. Exactly, Gavin said. You don't need a stronger mate. He looked at Verith. You need a balanced one. That reframed everything. Blue core dragons historically sought dominance matches. High output pairing. Explosive unions. Often unstable. Often lethal. You're saying, Verith said slowly, that my fertility issue was not absence of flame, but mismatch of calibration. Pretty much, Gavin replied. You were trying to ignite with partners tuned for standard output. That creates rejection spikes. Arcana absorbed that carefully. Then what do you propose? Gavin scratched his chin. Run compatibility diagnostics before bond trials. Tune channel frequencies instead of overpowering them. Dravarin's eyes narrowed slightly. You would mechanize sacred right. I would prevent preventable failure, Gavin answered calmly. Varith looked out over the volcanic horizon. Her whole life had been defined by what she lacked. Now she understood. She had never lacked anything. She had simply been unmatched. She turned back toward the gathered dragons. I will not rush bond ignition for politics. A bold statement. Some elders stiffened. I will select partnership based on balance. Not pressure. Another ripple moved through the crowd. Blue flame flickered gently from her nostrils. Controlled. Alive. Dravarin stepped forward and bowed fully this time. The Imperial Guard recognizes your claim. One by one, other houses followed. Not unanimous, but decisive. Later that evening, as the capital quieted, Gavin stood near the docking platform, preparing to return to his small maintenance ship. He never planned to stay long. He heard heavy wing beats behind him. Varith landed softly beside the platform. No guards. No ceremony. You are leaving, she said. Got other broken things in the galaxy, he replied. She studied him carefully. You changed the Empire. No, he said lightly. I adjusted a calibration. A faint smile touched her jaws. Why did you help me? He shrugged. You weren't broken. Simple. Honest. Human. She lowered her head slightly in acknowledgement. If I require further calibration, she said carefully, I will call. Gavin grinned. Try not to set the planet on fire in the meantime. She exhaled a thin, precise ribbon of blue flame into the sky. Not destructive. Beautiful. I will regulate, she replied. He boarded his ship. Engines ignited. As the vessel lifted off, he looked back one last time. On the highest terrace of Kael'thar, Princess Varith stood framed by volcanic light. No chains. No suppression. Blue flame shimmering steadily around her like a crown. The Empire had tried to bury her fire. They had called her barren. But the truth was far simpler. She had never been empty. She had been too powerful for those afraid of change. And it took a human mechanic. Someone who saw engines instead of superstition. To remind an empire that strength is not proven by suppression. It is proven by control. Far below, young hatchlings practiced small ignition sparks. Some gold. Some red. And one, very faintly, blue.